Have you ever just stopped and wondered what makes you, well, you? I mean, what shapes your personality, your talents, your whole identity from the day you were born? For ages, psychology has been trying to draw a map of the human mind. So today, let's dive into some of those maps.
This is it. This is the big question, right? It's what keeps parents up at night. It's what teachers think about. It's what we all try to figure out as we go through life. How much of us is already baked in and how much is learned along the way? What are those big moments that really define who we become?
Well, some of the greatest thinkers in psychology didn't just have theories. They actually tried to create blueprints, these incredible frameworks to help us make sense of the whole messy process of being human. You can think of them as guide maps for navigating our own lives. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. These world-changing ideas, the very ones that fill our textbooks and shape how we think about raising our kids, they are far from perfect. And honestly, understanding their flaws is just as important as understanding their genius.
So, we're going to explore 3 of these monumental blueprints from 3 absolute legends in the field: Erikson, Howard Gardner, and Albert Bandura. Each one gives us a totally unique lens to look at the human experience.
Let's kick things off with Erikson. And I mean, the ambition here was just staggering. He didn't just want to explain what happens in childhood. No, he wanted to map out the psychological journey we're on for our entire lives. The engine driving his whole theory is this idea of a psychosocial crisis. What does that mean? Well, he basically said that at each major stage of life, there's a kind of tug of war. Our own inner psychological needs are pulling one way, and the demands of society are pulling the other. How we figure out that conflict is what shapes us. And this table right here gives you a bird's eye view of his map. You can see it starts in infancy with a really basic but crucial crisis: trust versus mistrust. Basically, can I rely on the world to take care of me? Then you jump forward to the teen years, and you hit that famous one: identity versus role confusion, that classic struggle to figure out who you really are. And it goes all the way to the end, to late adulthood, where we face integrity versus despair. You know, looking back and asking, did I live a good life? It's this beautiful idea of each stage building on the last. All right, let's switch gears to our second blueprint. Now, in a world that has always been pretty obsessed with IQ scores and standardized tests, Howard Gardner came along and asked a totally game-changing question. What if being smart isn't just one single thing? He came up with the idea that we don't have just one general intelligence, but at least 8 different kinds. You've got the word smarts of a poet, the number smarts of a scientist, the body smarts of an athlete or a dancer, the people smarts of a great leader, and even the self smarts of someone who really knows themselves. This idea just blew the doors off the old way of thinking, especially in education.
And that brings us to our third and final blueprint. This one's from Albert Bandura, and it's all about a simple yet incredibly powerful idea. We are social animals, and one of the main ways we learn is just by watching each other. He pointed out that some of our most critical lessons aren't learned by doing, but by observing.
This is the heart of his social learning theory. You don't actually have to touch the hot stove yourself to learn that it's going to burn you. You can learn that lesson just fine by watching your older sibling do it and yell. It's about learning as a cognitive thing that happens in a social world. And it's not just mindless copying, like monkey see, monkey do. Bandura broke it down into 4 clear steps. First, you have to actually pay attention to what you're seeing. Then you have to retain it, lock it into your memory. After that, you need to be able to physically reproduce the action. And finally, and this is key, you need the motivation. You have to want to do it. Okay, so there you have it. 3 really powerful, really compelling blueprints for what it means to be human. But as I said before, they're not perfect. So now it's time for the reality check, where we dig into the major criticisms that challenge these huge ideas. So let's go back to Erikson. His 8 stages, they just feel so right, don't they? They tell this really compelling story about a human life, but that's where the critics jump in. They ask, is this a beautiful, poetic description, or is it actually a scientific theory? So let's zoom in on his most famous idea, forming our identity during our teenage years. Erikson himself wrote this, saying that identity is a lifelong process, which sounds great. It's a very modern way of thinking. But this is where things start to get a little complicated. Because here's the major contradiction. In some of his work, Erikson flat out says that our final identity gets locked in by the time we're out of our teens. But then elsewhere, he suggests that our identity stays flexible and we can keep working on it our whole lives.
Well, which is it? Both can't be true, and that kind of vagueness makes the theory really, really hard to test scientifically.
And the critiques don't stop there. Critics point out that his theory is pretty vague on what causes us to move from one stage to the next. He describes the journey but not the engine. There's also just a lack of hard scientific data to back up these neat and tidy stages. And on top of that, many argue his model is based on a very traditional masculine view of life, which might not fit everyone's experience.
Okay, on to Howard Gardner. His theory of multiple intelligences was like a breath of fresh air for so many teachers and students who felt like the whole IQ system was failing them. It's wildly popular. But when you look for the hard science to back it up, it's surprisingly difficult to find.
So here's the fundamental question that critics ask. Are these 8 things he identified really separate, independent intelligences, or are they just better described as skills or talents or abilities? That distinction is absolutely crucial.
And the scientific case against the theory is pretty tough. First, there's very little empirical evidence to prove these intelligences are truly distinct. In fact, studies show that when you test for them, they tend to correlate pretty strongly with each other. This points back to a much older idea of a single general intelligence factor. Psychologists call it G, which is kind of like an underlying mental horsepower that helps you out across all sorts of different tasks.
So you might be thinking, okay, if these big, famous theories are so full of holes and contradictions and lack solid evidence, then why are we still talking about them? Why do they stick around? And the answer really comes down to one word: usefulness. Just look at the real-world impact. Erikson stages give therapists, coaches, and just regular people a vocabulary to talk about the challenges we face at different points in our lives. Gardner's theory, for all its scientific issues, was a huge inspiration for teachers to change up their methods and value the different ways students can be smart. And Bandura's work? It led to this incredible field called entertainment education, like the TV drama Soul City in South Africa, which modeled safe sex practices and literally saved lives during the HIV/AIDS crisis. That's a massive impact.
So here's the big takeaway from all this. These blueprints, these maps of the human mind, they don't have to be perfect to be incredibly useful. They give us a framework, a language, a starting point to understand ourselves and the people around us, even if the real territory is always going to be way more complicated than the map.
These theories were absolutely revolutionary. They were the first real attempts to chart the massive, wild territory of the human mind. They gave us our first drafts of the map. And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What uncharted territories are still out there? What new blueprints are just waiting to be drawn?